What are some of the most intense conflicts you've had with another person? Who have those conflicts been with? I imagine the people you have in mind when I ask these questions are likely those who are closest to you: your family, friends, maybe a significant other, or your children. This fact identifies an important aspect of human life. Specifically, it shows us something important about human social life or human sociability. On the one hand, much of the satisfaction and fulfillment we gain in life comes from spending time with other people, from spending time with those we love and care about. At the same time, the reality is that successfully coordinating our interactions with other people, in particular those who are closest to us, takes real effort and poses many challenges. Because we all have different perspectives, preferences, and needs, any association of human beings will naturally fall into some level of conflict. And these conflicts often can be surmounted by putting into place specific rules to coordinate our behavior. Such is the nature of human social life. We are naturally drawn to life with other people despite the inevitable conflicts that it brings about. This same dynamic that exists among one's family and friends also exists within society at large. It is natural and necessary for human beings to organize themselves into neighborhoods, religious communities, political associations, towns, cities, states, and countries. But none of these can function well without rules to regulate behavior and resolve conflict. And these rules are known as the principles of justice. In this video, we will explore the concept of justice and consider how justice is related to our social nature as human beings. Previously, we examined Newton's claim that ethics is about human beings. The idea here is that the most basic ethical principles that should guide our conduct are based upon facts about human nature. In the last video, we saw how the principle of beneficence is based upon the fact that human beings are embodied. Here we will discuss how the principles of justice are based upon human sociability. One philosopher who saw very clearly the connection between justice and human sociability was Aristotle. Aristotle explains this point in his book, The Politics. He tells us, "A social instinct is implanted in all men by nature, and yet he who first founded the state was the greatest of benefactors." Here we see the duality of social life I mentioned at the outset. There is a natural instinct or impulse for human beings to live together. In another place in the Politics, Aristotle puts the point in the following way: "Man is by nature a political animal, and he who by nature and not mere accident is without a state is either a bad man or above humanity. The individual, when isolated, is not self-sufficing. He who is unable to live in society, or who has no need because he is sufficient for himself, must be either a beast or a god. Any person that could truly flourish completely on his or her own, who is self-sufficing, would be entirely unrecognizable to us, almost someone who we cannot recognize as part of the human species or the human family. As Aristotle puts it, such a person would either have to be a beast or a god together. However, because our shared living arrangements do bring us into conflict, Aristotle notes that the state and the rules of justice that it enforces are absolutely necessary for us to protect our shared way of life. Aristotle continues, "For man, when perfected, is the best of animals, but when separated from law and justice, he is the worst of all, since armed injustice is the more dangerous. If he have not virtue, he is the most unholy and most savage of animals." So human nature teeters on a precipice. We are capable of cooperation, care, concern, and virtuous sacrifice for others. We are also capable of viciously harming others in pursuit of our own selfish desires. Ultimately, it is the administration of justice that allows the more admirable aspects of our nature to flourish. Justice, Aristotle continues on, is the bond of men and states, for the administration of justice is the principle of order in political society. There are two fundamental reasons for Aristotle's claim that human beings are not self sufficing, and that only a beast or a god could live alone. In part, it is because humans have a natural social instinct and desire to live with others. However, it is also because survival itself is difficult. Human beings, as embodied creatures, need food, water, and shelter to live. We can only get these things through interacting with our physical environment, and the challenges this presents are significant enough that the possibility of doing so successfully on our own is actually quite slim. As such, there is a real practical need for human social life. Yet, as Newton explains, in our attempts to withstand the vicissitudes of our natural world and succeed in the struggle for survival, more problems arise. She states that they will soon discover that this necessity produces a new set of problems. They must cope with a social environment as well as a physical one. So, our chosen remedy for the challenges of survival, which is coordinated effort with other human beings, ends up producing its own set of challenges. The social environment itself makes demands upon us. Of course, this phenomena is relatively common, and I think the advance of technology provides myriad examples. For example, cars allow us a means of efficient transportation, and they have significantly improved the quality of human life. But they also require significant upkeep and attention, are a leading cause of death, and can have harmful environmental effects. Smartphones allow us to stay connected with our loved ones, make the wealth of human knowledge available to us, and have caused significant gains in economic productivity. At the same time, they're also a notorious source of distraction. Human social life is no different. Coordinated living makes survival possible while at the same time posing new problems that require novel solutions. What are these problems? Well, Newton identifies two. First, how do we communicate with one another? In order to live together in a cooperative fashion, in order to coordinate our efforts in a productive way, we need to communicate our plans to one another and build social trust. Second, how do we establish a social structure that coordinates and regulates our behavior? Newton explains that the first problem is solved through language, while the second problem, which will be our focus here, is resolved with the principles of justice. The 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes explained the necessity of the principles of justice in the following remarks from his book Leviathan. Whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them. Here Hobbes is saying something about what it is like to live without enforceable rules of justice to regulate our conduct, where the only protection we have against the violence and violation of others is our own strength. He compares such a state, which he called the state of nature, to a state of complete war. Now, this alone suggests that the state of nature is not to be envied. And he continues on to explain further the disadvantages that occur in the state of nature. Hobbes tells us, in such a condition there is no place for industry, no culture of the earth, no navigation, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. So without enforceable rules of justice, society quickly falls into anarchy. Without cooperation, the human species never accomplishes any higher achievements, like the pursuit of knowledge, great literature, or even advanced commerce. If there is nothing to stop our fellow humans from stealing our goods or violating our person, then the result is continual fear about an impending violent death. And as Hobbes famously remarks, in such a condition, which he characterizes as a state of war, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, Aristotle is clearly more optimistic and cheery about the natural sociability of human beings than Hobbes is. But recall that even Aristotle claimed that humans are the most unholy and savage animals without justice. We can see then how the principles of justice are grounded in human sociability. Without these principles, there's constant backstabbing, thievery, and violence. Without these principles, productive human social life is simply impossible. Thus far, our discussion is focused on the need for the principles of justice. As Newton states here, we must take account of each other in all of our actions, and we come saddled by nature with obligations to the group in general. But what are the principles of justice? What do they do? What is their content? Of course, this is a question of considerable dispute among philosophers. Here we will begin to approach this question by making some general remarks about the principles of justice and looking at one especially influential formulation of them. Now, Newton says the following about the content of these principles. The attempt to do good to others as to oneself involves the adoption of the moral point of view, or a stance of impartiality with regard to the distribution of benefits and burdens. Here I want to focus on the claim that justice requires an impartial distribution of the benefits and burdens of living together. What are the benefits and burdens of living together? On the benefits side, we have protection by the police, military, and fire department, a public education system, administration of public utilities and transportation, and other such services. In addition, these services and others provide the physical, social, and political infrastructure that facilitates commerce and makes it possible for citizens to hold positions of social, political, and economic influence through their employment. On the burden side, there's the fact that we are no longer permitted to act in whatever way we like. There are laws against violating others that we must follow. We run the risk of criminal punishment if we break the law. We have to pay taxes, and depending upon how robustly we conceive of our civic duties, we may be required or at least socially pressured to do things like sit on juries, vote, and stay informed on current events. So there are a wide variety of benefits and burdens in society. For the purposes of illustration, I want to focus on one burden in particular, the burden of taxation. Nobody enjoys paying taxes. It is the clearest example of a burden of our common social life. Yet everyone except the most hardcore libertarian recognizes the need for some level of taxation. Given this, the question naturally arises: who should bear the brunt of this burden of taxation? This is a question that follows under the heading of justice. What is a just distribution of the tax burden? Now, Newton points out that we should be impartial when answering this question or any other question of justice. And furthermore, that in doing so, we should respect the fact that all people have equal dignity. She explains this in the following way. People are equal, and since equality itself is a value derived from equal dignity, the society must deal with them equally unless good reason is given for differential treatment. So, does equality mean that everyone must be treated the same? Does it imply that everyone must pay the same amount in taxes, have the same access to positions of influence, and make the same amount of money? Well, no. Newton points out that people must be treated equally unless there is some good reason for people to be treated differently. But, of course, there are all sorts of reasons it would make sense for people to be treated differently, even if all people are the same in terms of moral importance. In most countries, the rich take on a higher proportion of the tax burden. based upon the assumption that those with more should contribute more to the services needed for society to function well. A very small percentage of people get to be doctors, based upon the fact that few have the necessary skills and education to do the job properly. And hopefully, only a small percentage of the population will end up in jail because only a small percentage of the population commit crimes which warrant punishment. The claim then that all people are equal in moral dignity does not mean that all must be treated the same. It means that we need a good reason for treating people differently. And what counts as a good reason is precisely what needs to be specified by the principles of justice. Newton identifies the principles of the philosopher John Rawls as an example of the principles that might govern a just society. And many other philosophers have found Rawls' two principles of justice to be convincing as well. These principles are known as the liberty principle and the difference principle. The liberty principle states the following: each person shall enjoy the greatest liberty compatible with a like liberty for all. The liberty principle supposes that political freedom is a good thing, and holds that we should try to permit as much political freedom as possible in society, at least as much as is equivalent with others having the same. Something like the liberty principle undergirds our view of political rights. Take the right to the freedom of speech. We think that we can permit freedom of speech because one person voicing their opinion does not, in principle, take away from any other person's right to speak. Of course, this also points to certain rights that cannot be allowed. I cannot use my power and position to systematically ensure that other people can never voice their opinion. To do that would be to act in a way that ensures my own freedom of speech, but is not consistent with others having the same. The same can be said of other political rights, like the freedom to worship as one pleases. I am permitted to participate in whatever religion I like, provided that others are also permitted to make the same choice for themselves. Here then we see a concrete expression of the idea that all people are equal in moral importance and dignity, and that political arrangements ought to respect this fundamental equality of all citizens. Whereas the liberty principle specifies the ways in which we must be treated equally, the difference principle outlines the circumstances in which we can be treated differently. The difference principle states that equality of position shall be maintained unless the following two things can be shown. One, that the creation of inequality is advantageous for everyone, not just the ruling elite, not just the majority, but especially the least advantaged. And two, that the positions are created so that they are open to all on the basis of equality of opportunity. So when is it permitted for some to have more wealth than others? For some to be able to hold positions of power and prestige in society that others cannot have? Only when permitting such equality makes society better off as a whole, and in particular improves the lot of those who are least advantaged. That is, those with the fewest resources, born into the most challenging circumstances, with the fewest natural talents and gifts. What does this mean in practice? Well, consider the fact of economic inequality. Perhaps some degree of economic inequality is necessary to provide the incentive needed for people to engage in productive work. We need to know that our efforts will be rewarded with financial gain in order to be motivated to do the work that needs to be done, work that makes society as a whole better off. Now, if all that's true, then whatever level of economic inequality is required to make that happen should be permitted. But if that level is exceeded, then there has been a violation of the principles of justice. Consider also the fact that only a select few can be chosen for certain desirable jobs. Does society benefit when only the best and brightest are selected to be doctors through the credentialing and hiring process, or hold other positions of great influence? If it does, then that should be permitted, but only to the extent that it actually makes the least advantaged best off. But why do these inequalities need to serve the interests of society as a whole? This is because much of what determines our level of wealth, power, influence, and success is not up to us. What allowed us to reach those higher levels that produce inequality is not entirely in our control. It depends on many factors that are out of our control, such as natural intelligence, talent, and the circumstances of our birth. So, because those who are blessed with special talents and advantages did not earn those gifts, they were not in control of whether they possessed them in the first place, there should be a requirement that the benefits they produce should serve the community as a whole. Rawls' principles are not strictly egalitarian. They do not require that all people receive exactly the same benefits. However, the purpose of the principles is to mitigate against the unequal circumstances that we're all born into. Rawls' principles, if followed consistently, would go a long way to minimize economic inequality. In Rawls' view, a just society permits people to use their advantages for the common good and even reap the benefits to some degree, but not to exploit their talents purely for their own personal gain. To this point, we have focused on the principles of justice as they are applied to society at large. However, given the nature of human sociability, some form of the principles of justice will be necessary to regulate any form of human association. In fact, a popular observation by many thinkers in the history of philosophy is that even the unjust, even associations of criminals, need some principles of justice to regulate their behavior. For example, the 18th century philosopher David Hume remarked that robbers and pirates could not maintain their pernicious confederacy did they not establish a new distributive justice among themselves and recall those laws of equity which they have violated with the rest of mankind. Thus, the centrality of justice to all human organization seems to be a well established reality of life. Now, given that justice is one of the Belmont principles, and given that the Belmont principles arose as a response to moral failings in the area of biomedical research, it may also come as no surprise that the principles of justice play a principal role in bioethics as well. In the Belmont Report itself, we see an emphasis on the importance of fairly distributing the benefits and burdens of biomedical research. The report asks, who ought to receive the benefits of research and bear its burdens? This is a question of justice in the sense of fairness in distribution or what is deserved. An injustice occurs when some benefit to which a person is entitled is denied without good reason or when some burden is imposed unduly. So, what are the benefits and burdens of biomedical research? Well, the medical community and society as a whole gain from advances in knowledge, while at least to some degree, the participants in the research are burdened with respect to their time and energy. So, given that there are various benefits of research and also various burdens, it will be important that we balance these appropriately and we do so in a just, fair, and equitable way. The Belmont Report also emphasizes the importance of moral equality, while allowing that there are various reasons why not all necessarily need to be treated exactly the same. The report continues to say that another way of conceiving the principle of justice is that equals ought to be treated equally. However, this statement requires explication. Who is equal and who is unequal? What considerations justify departure from equal distribution? There are several widely accepted formulations of just ways to distribute burdens and benefits. What are these formulations? The report lists the following examples. To each person an equal share. To each person according to individual need, according to individual effort, according to societal contribution, and according to merit. Now, each of these criteria for departing from strict equality was represented in Rawls' two principles of justice to some degree. Those who make great contributions to society are permitted to receive a greater share of desired goods. but only if doing so makes the least advantage better off than they would be otherwise. So we should expect to see a similar thing in the realm of biomedical research. It may be the case that not every individual receives an equal share of the benefits of research. However, if any departure from equality is enacted, if we do permit some level of inequality, we should expect that that inequality will benefit the whole and make especially the least well off better than they would be otherwise. In fact, the idea which underlies Rawls' difference principle took on a prominent role in the Belmont Report's discussion of justice. The report points to a number of examples, including the Tuskegee study, where the least advantaged were exploited for the sake of scientific research and did not share properly in the benefits of that research. The report identifies how, during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the burdens of serving as research subjects fell largely upon poor ward patients, while the benefits of improved medical care flowed primarily to private patients. Subsequently, the exploitation of unwilling prisoners as research subjects in Nazi concentration camps was condemned as a particularly flagrant injustice. In this country, in the 1940s, the Tuskegee syphilis study used disadvantaged rural black men to study the untreated course of a disease that is by no means confined to that population. In order to rectify such failings of justice, the report emphasizes that research subjects should not be identified or targeted because of their vulnerability or because it will just be easy to get them to participate. The report states that, for example, the selection of research subjects needs to be scrutinized in order to determine whether some classes, for example, welfare patients, particular racial and ethnic minorities, or persons confined to institutions, are being systematically selected simply because of their easy availability, their compromised position, or their manipulability, rather than for reasons directly related to the problem being studied. What the report aims to prohibit here is a particular kind of injustice known as exploitation. Exploitation occurs when someone takes advantage of another's weakness or vulnerability for their own gain. Instead, research subjects must be chosen for reasons having directly to do with the research itself, and furthermore, as we will discuss in more detail in the next video, that participation must be gained through the consent of the participant instead of through deception or manipulation. On this point, the writers of the Belmont Report not only had in mind cases like the Tuskegee study, but also the use of prisoners for biomedical research, where it is difficult to determine to what extent the consent given by prisoners to participate is free and uncoerced. In addition, the report also specifies that the benefits of the research, the new drugs, therapies, and treatments it produces, must be shared in an equitable fashion. Whenever research supported by public funds leads to the development of therapeutic devices and procedures, the report states that justice demands both that these not provide advantages only to those who can afford them, and that such research should not unduly involve persons from groups unlikely to be among the beneficiaries of subsequent applications of the research. This shows that justice in biomedical research does not only concern how the research studies are set up and how participants are selected, even though, of course, those are vital concerns. But it also concerns broader social and political questions of how healthcare resources are distributed throughout the entire society. The point made here is that, at minimum, it should not be the case that those who took on the burden of participating in the research are unlikely to reap the benefits of it. Furthermore, and broadly in line with Rawls' principles of justice, especially the difference principle, attention should be paid to make sure that biomedical research does not only end up benefiting wealthy individuals who can afford the new treatments. Efforts should be made to ensure that people of all socioeconomic backgrounds can avail themselves of the fruits of cutting edge medical research and consequently enjoy the greater quality of life that they provide. To conclude, we should recall to ourselves how the fact of human embodiment and the fact of human sociability interact with one another, and what this tells us about the condition of human life. Now, suffering and deprivation are simple facts of our lives as human beings. Newton explains this point. By virtue of that abysmal capacity for suffering, the human condition cries out for compassion and compels attention to human well being and the relief of pain. And this condition is shared. Fortunately, however, the human species has done the best it can to reduce suffering and meet human need, and in a wide variety of areas has been met with astounding success. However, this is an effort that no person can undertake alone. Human progress has always been a result of a group effort, and this need for coordinated effort brings about another permanent aspect of human life: the need for rules that specify fair and equal and equitable treatment, the principles of justice. Newton points out that we are enjoined not only to serve human need and respect human rights, but to establish justice by constructing a political and legal structure which will distribute fairly the burdens and benefits of life on this earth in the society of humans. While it is an undeniable fact that humans have made great progressive strides in improving the quality of our lives, all too often these strides have come on the backs of the least advantaged and most vulnerable. The history of humanity in our effort to undermine and ameliorate human suffering is also replete with examples of injustice. Fortunately, the mere fact that we can recognize such injustice does give us a reason for hope. The need for humans to live together in cities, states, countries, and even as a world community is unavoidable. As Aristotle reminds us, it is only a beast or a god that could have no need for social life. Yet it is notable that our moral conscience is not satisfied with just any social arrangement that produces rules for how to act. No, our conscience can recognize injustice and moral abuse and call to secure the equal rights and fair treatment that are demanded by human dignity. As we will see, this shows how our ability to produce increasingly more just, fair, and equitable social structures not only stems from our human sociability, but reflects our recognition of the fact that all persons deserve respect and equal consideration.